At 5:47 a.m. on January 28, 1980, Tony Mendez stood in the lobby of the Sheraton Hotel in Tehran, Iran, 39 years old, CIA Chief of Disguise, 14 years with the agency's Office of Technical Service. In 37 minutes, he would walk 6 American diplomats through the most dangerous airport in the world. Iranian Revolutionary Guards controlled every checkpoint. Islamic militants scrutinized every passport. One mistake meant execution. Standard procedure for a CIA exfiltration said bring backup, carry a weapon, plan 3 escape routes. Mendez had none of those things. He carried forged Canadian passports and a briefcase full of lies, and 6 terrified Americans were counting on him to sell the greatest con in CIA history. 79 days earlier, 400 radical Iranian students had stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran. It was November 4th, 1979. The embassy takeover lasted 6 hours. 66 Americans were captured. 52 would spend 444 days as hostages. 6 escaped into the chaos of revolutionary Tehran, and nobody knew how to get them out. The math was brutal. 0 successful American exfiltrations from Iran since the revolution began. 0 covert operations that hadn't been compromised by Revolutionary Guards or militants. 100% chance of execution if the 6 were caught. The pattern was clear. Americans in Iran were trapped. The embassy compound was occupied by students who called themselves followers of Ayatollah Khomeini. They ransacked filing cabinets. They burned classified documents. They paraded blindfolded hostages before television cameras. This was Tehran in revolution. The Shah had fled 10 months earlier. The Ayatollah had returned from exile. Iran had transformed from a Western ally into an Islamic republic that despised America. Every American in the country was a target, and 6 had managed to slip away unnoticed that morning. Robert Anders, 52 years old, Consul General, 24 years with the State Department. He'd been processing visa applications when the militants stormed the front gates. He walked out the back. Lee Schatz, 29 years old, agricultural attaché. He'd been in the consular section, saw the mob climbing the walls, walked through the crowd carrying a newspaper. Nobody stopped him. Mark Liek, 29 years old, consular officer. His wife, Cora Ambern Liek, 25, worked as his assistant. They'd been in an office on the compound's north side. They heard the shouting. They ran. Joseph Stafford, 29 years old, consular officer. His wife, Kathleen, 28, worked as secretary. They'd been together when the takeover began. They made it to the street, 6 Americans, alive, unaccounted for, somewhere in Tehran. The militants didn't know they'd escaped, but they would. Iranian Revolutionary Guards were methodical. They'd inventory every employee, check every bedroom in the embassy residence, count every name on the personnel roster. The 6 would be discovered missing within days, maybe hours, and then the hunt would begin. The 6 spent the first night hiding in different locations across Tehran. Anders knocked on doors of foreign diplomats, British, Swedish, Canadian, anyone who might help. Most turned him away. Too dangerous, too risky. Don't get involved. The British consul, a man named John Graves, sheltered Anders and Schatz for one night, then passed them to the Canadian embassy. The Lieks and Staffords had been moving house to house, sleeping on floors, afraid to stay anywhere too long. On November 10th, they reunited at the Canadian embassy on Shahid Beheshti Avenue. Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor opened his door. The 6 Americans walked in, and the clock started ticking. Taylor was 45 years old, career diplomat, posted to Tehran in 1977. His wife, Pat, a microbiologist, lived with him in the official residence. Taylor understood what harboring Americans meant. If discovered, Canada's relationship with Iran would be destroyed. His staff could be arrested. He could be declared persona non grata, expelled, or worse. But he looked at 6 terrified Americans standing in his home, and he said yes. The Canadians had taken enormous personal risks. Taylor sheltered 2 of the 6 in his residence. His deputy, John Sheardown, took 4 others into his home. The Americans lived in their bedrooms, ate meals with their families, waited. Weeks turned into months. The Canadians couldn't keep this secret forever. The militants were piecing together shredded documents from the embassy, reconstructing personnel files. Eventually, they'd match names to faces. They'd realize 6 Americans were missing, and they'd start searching. If you want to see how the CIA pulled off one of the most audacious rescues in espionage history, using nothing but fake movie posters in a story so ridiculous it had to work, stay with me. What happens next changed how intelligence agencies think about impossible problems. In Washington, the crisis consumed the White House. President Jimmy Carter held daily meetings. State Department, CIA, Pentagon, Defense Secretary Harold Brown, Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, CIA Director Stansfield Turner. The hostages dominated every headline. ABC News started a nightly program called America Held Hostage. Day 10, Day 20, Day 30. The count climbed. American prestige crumbled, and nobody could figure out how to get anyone out. The military had plans. Operation Eagle Claw, a helicopter assault on the embassy compound, 8 RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters, 90 Delta Force operators, extract the 52 hostages by force. It was scheduled for April 1980, but it wouldn't help the 6 hiding with the Canadians, because nobody in Tehran knew where they were. You can't rescue people the enemy doesn't have. The 6 needed something different, not a military operation, not a diplomatic negotiation, something covert, something invisible, something that got them through Mehrabad International Airport in broad daylight, without Iranian officials noticing they were Americans. At CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a 39-year-old officer named Antonio Joseph Mendez read the intelligence reports and saw an impossible problem. Mendez was chief of the authentication branch in the Office of Technical Service. He specialized in identity transformation, fake documents, false identities, disguises. He'd spent 14 years teaching CIA officers how to become other people. He'd created legends for agents operating in Moscow, designed documents that passed Soviet scrutiny, built entire fictional lives that could withstand KGB investigation. Now his bosses wanted him to invent a way to walk 6 Americans through an airport controlled by people who wanted to kill Americans. The problem was elegant in its simplicity. The 6 couldn't pretend to be Iranian. They didn't speak Farsi. They looked American. They sounded American. They couldn't pretend to be diplomats. Iranian officials checked every diplomatic passport against Ministry of Foreign Affairs records. The 6 weren't registered. They couldn't sneak out. Mehrabad Airport had Revolutionary Guards at every checkpoint. Passport control was brutal. Militant students worked alongside immigration officers. Anyone suspicious was pulled aside, questioned, searched, sometimes arrested. The 6 needed a reason to be in Iran that wouldn't raise suspicion. A cover story so believable that Iranian officials would wave them through. Something so normal that nobody would look twice. Mendez sat in his office at Langley, December 1979. He thought about his career, the operations that had worked, the principles of good cover. Make it simple. Make it verifiable. Make it boring. Intelligence officers succeed when they blend in, when they become unremarkable, when guards at checkpoints find them so normal they stop paying attention. And Mendez remembered Hollywood. 3 years earlier, Mendez had worked with a makeup artist named John Chambers. Chambers had won an Academy Award for creating the ape costumes in Planet of the Apes. He'd also consulted for the CIA, designing disguises, prosthetics, latex masks that transformed Asian CIA officers into Caucasians, black officers into Hispanics. The agency paid well. Chambers liked the work. The 2 men had stayed in touch. Mendez picked up the phone. "John," he said, "I need to create a fake movie. Can you help?" Chambers asked why. Mendez couldn't tell him over an unsecured line, but he explained enough. The CIA needed Hollywood legitimacy, business cards, letterhead. advertisements in trade publications, an office address, a production company that looked real. Chambers understood immediately. He'd been in Hollywood for 30 years. He knew how the industry worked. He knew what productions looked like. He knew who to call. On January 23, 1980, President Carter gave final approval. Mendez flew from Washington to Los Angeles. He met Chambers at a restaurant in Burbank. Chambers brought a colleague named Robert Siddell, a Hollywood makeup artist and special effects designer. The three men sat in a booth. Mendez laid out the operation. 6 Americans trapped in Tehran. Need to get them through the airport. The cover story. Canadian filmmakers scouting locations for a science fiction movie. Chambers and Siddell looked at each other and started building. They had 4 days. Step 1. Find a script. Science fiction was hot in 1979. Star Wars had dominated theaters. Close Encounters, Superman, Alien. Studios were developing dozens of space epics. Chambers knew about one called Lord of Light, based on a Roger Zelazny novel. Elaborate production design, futuristic sets, exotic locations. The project had stalled. Funding had collapsed. But the artwork existed. Incredible concept drawings by comic book artist Jack Kirby. Temples, spaceships, alien landscapes, perfect for a fake movie scouting exotic locations. They renamed it Argo. Shorter, simpler, easier to remember. The tagline, a cosmic conflagration, science fiction epic set on an alien world. Studio 6 Productions would produce it, named for the 6 Americans who needed rescue. Step 2, create the infrastructure. Chambers and Siddell rented office space at 1334 North Beechwood Drive in Hollywood, hung a Studio 6 Productions sign, printed business cards, designed letterhead, set up a phone line that rang to an answering service, built a paper trail that proved Studio 6 existed. Step 3, go public. Hollywood legitimacy meant Hollywood publicity. On January 26, 1980, Studio 6 Productions placed a full-page advertisement in Variety. The ad showed concept art for Argo, announced the production, listed the producers, cost $12,000. But Iranian officials might check. If they called Hollywood contacts asking about Studio 6, someone needed to say, yes, we've heard of them. The Hollywood Reporter ran a story. Trade publications mentioned Studio 6 in their production roundups. For 1 week in January 1980, Argo was a real movie with real buzz. Producers took meetings, answered questions from agents asking about casting, pretended to scout talent. The con was perfect. Nobody in Hollywood knew it was fake because almost nobody knew it was CIA. While Hollywood built the cover, Mendez built the legend. Each of the 6 Americans needed a new identity. Canadian filmmakers, specific roles, producer, director, cinematographer, production designer, location scout, transportation coordinator. He created passports, Canadian, forged with CIA's best document authentication technology, entry stamps showing they'd arrived in Iran legally, visa stamps, customs declarations, everything perfectly ordinary. He created backstories, where they lived in Canada, what films they'd worked on, what their cover jobs entailed. He wrote scripts for conversations. If Iranian immigration asked about the film, what would they say? Argo is a science fiction adventure. We're scouting desert locations. Iran has incredible landscapes. We're considering the desert near Shiraz. Keep it simple. Keep it consistent. Don't volunteer information. Answer questions directly. Smile. Be boring. Be Canadian. On January 25th, 1980, Mendez and a second CIA officer flew from Washington to Tehran. The second officer was Ed Johnson, age 37, exfiltration specialist, fluent in Farsi, German, French, Czech, and Arabic. His job, translate if things went wrong. His cover name, Julio. Mendez's cover, Kevin Harkins, Irish filmmaker. Johnson played his assistant. They flew through Frankfurt. Commercial airline. No weapons. No backup team. Just 2 middle-aged men with briefcases full of documents and a plan that sounded insane. They landed at Mehrabad Airport at 4:30 a.m. on January 26th. Passed through immigration. Revolutionary Guards check their passports. Ask questions. Why are you in Tehran? Scouting film locations. How long will you stay? 5 days. Where are you staying? The Sheraton. The guards stamped their passports, waved them through. Mendez and Johnson were inside revolutionary Iran. They checked into the Sheraton, slept for 3 hours. At 8 o'clock a.m., a Canadian embassy car picked them up, drove them to Ken Taylor's residence. The 6 Americans were waiting: Robert Anders, Lee Schatz, Mark and Cora Leek, Joseph and Kathleen Stafford. They'd been in hiding for 79 days, living in Canadian homes, watching Iranian television broadcast footage of the hostages at the embassy, wondering if they'd ever get out. And now 2 CIA officers stood in the living room saying, "We're taking you home tomorrow morning." Through the airport, disguised as a film crew, Mendez spread the documents on the dining table: 6 Canadian passports, business cards, scripts, production materials, letters of introduction from Studio 6 Productions. He looked at the 6 Americans. They looked terrified. "You're going to have to sell this," Mendez said. "Immigration officers will ask questions. Revolutionary Guards might interrogate you. You have to believe you're Canadian filmmakers. You have to believe Argo is real." Kathleen Stafford picked up her fake passport. Her new name, Teresa Harris. Set designer. Born in Ottawa. She'd never been to Ottawa. She'd never worked on a film. She looked at Mendez. "What if they don't believe us?" "Then we'll all be executed," Mendez said. "So make them believe you." They spent 24 hours rehearsing. Mendez drilled them on their cover stories. "Where did you grow up? What films have you worked on? What's the plot of Argo? Why are you scouting Iran?" The 6 Americans repeated their answers until they sounded natural, until Canadian identity became reflex. Mendez taught them small details. Canadians say "about" differently than Americans. Canadians say Z, not Z. Walk confidently. Don't look nervous. Act like you belong, because the moment you look scared, they'll know something's wrong. January 27th, 1980, 3 o'clock a.m. Mendez couldn't sleep. The plan had too many variables, too many places it could fail. Mehrabad Airport was chaos. Revolutionary Guards, militant students, immigration officers loyal to the Islamic Republic. Passport control that checked every document against central records. If one passport number didn't match, if one visa stamp looked wrong, if one American broke character and said Z instead of Z, the whole operation collapsed. And there was no backup plan, no extraction team waiting outside, no helicopters on standby. If the 6 were caught, Mendez couldn't save them. The CIA would disavow the operation. Canada would claim ignorance. The 6 Americans would face revolutionary tribunals, espionage charges, collaborating with the CIA, penalty, execution. The phone in Mendez's hotel room rang at 3:47 a.m. It was Ken Taylor. Time to go. At 5 o'clock a.m., 8 people gathered at the Canadian ambassador's residence. Mendez, Johnson, the 6 Americans. Taylor gave each of them Canadian flag pins, gifts from the Canadian embassy. "Wear these," he said. "You're Canadian now. Act like it." The 6 pinned the flags to their jackets, picked up their luggage. Studio 6. Productions had prepared film equipment, cameras, light meters, location scouting notes, props that sold the story. Taylor drove them to Mehrabad Airport in 2 cars. Iranian morning traffic was thick. Revolutionary Guards manned checkpoints throughout the city. Each checkpoint could be the end. But Taylor had diplomatic plates. The guards waved them through. They arrived at Mehrabad at 5:45 a.m. The airport terminal was surprisingly empty. Sunday morning, January 27, 1980. Few commercial flights. The Swissair flight to Zurich departed at 7:30 a.m. They had 105 minutes to pass through passport control, security, and customs. 105 minutes to maintain the lie. Mendez told the 6 to spread out. Don't travel as a group. Pairs, threes. Look like you barely know each other, just colleagues on a film project, not fugitives fleeing together. The Staffords went first, then the Leeks, then Anders and Schatz. Mendez and Johnson followed, 8 people walking separately through an airport controlled by revolutionary guards who hated Americans. The passport control line moved slowly. Each traveler was questioned. Papers were checked, compared against lists. The officer behind the desk was young, maybe 25 years old, loyal to the revolution. He wore a green military jacket, Revolutionary Guard insignia. He looked at every passport with suspicion. Joseph Stafford stepped forward, handed over his Canadian passport, his cover name, Joseph Harris, associate producer. The immigration officer opened the passport, studied the photo, looked at Stafford's face. Back to the photo. He asked a question in Farsi. Stafford didn't understand. He shook his head. Sorry, I don't speak Farsi. English? The officer switched to broken English. Why are you in Iran? Scouting film locations, Stafford said. We're making a movie. What movie? Science fiction. It's called Argo. We're looking for desert landscapes. The officer flipped through the passport, checked the visa stamp, looked at the entry date. Everything was perfect. CIA forgeries were perfect. He stamped the exit visa, waved Stafford through. Kathleen Stafford went next. Same questions, same calm answers. The officer stamped her passport. She walked toward the departure gate. One checkpoint down. The logics followed. Mark first, then Cora. The immigration officer asked more questions this time. What company do you work for? Studio 6 Productions. Where is that based? Los Angeles, California. He picked up a phone. Spoke to someone in Farsi. Mendez watched from 6 people back in line. If the officer called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to verify Studio 6, the operation was over, but the officer hung up. Stamped the passports. The Lejecks walked through. Anders and Schatz were next. Anders was 52, the oldest of the 6. He'd spent 79 days convinced he'd never make it out. Now he stood at passport control pretending to be a Canadian film consultant named James Boughton. The officer asked where he'd been in Iran. Tehran only, Anders said. Just arrived 2 days ago. The officer asked why they hadn't scouted locations yet. Bad weather, Anders said. We're rescheduling. The lie came easily. The officer stamped the passport. Schatz handed over his documents. The immigration officer asked about the film equipment. Why do you have cameras if you haven't scouted locations? Schatz explained they were testing equipment. Light readings, camera settings, making sure everything worked before the crew arrived. The officer looked skeptical. He opened Schatz's bag, pulled out a camera, a light meter, production notes, Studio 6 letterhead. Everything looked legitimate. He closed the bag, stamped the passport, waved him through. 6 Americans through passport control. Mendez and Johnson went last. They'd done this before, dozens of times. Different countries, different covers. They knew how to be boring, how to make immigration officers lose interest. Mendez handed over his Irish passport. Kevin Harkins, film producer. The officer asked routine questions. Mendez answered in a bored tone. Yes, we're leaving. No, we didn't find the locations we wanted. Yes, we might return. The officer stamped the passport. Johnson followed. Same questions, same bored answers. They were through. 8 people stood in the departure lounge. The Swissair flight to Zurich was boarding, gate 4. They walked toward it, slowly, casually. Film crew heading home after an unsuccessful scouting trip. Nobody running, nobody looking back. And then a voice called out in Farsi. A Revolutionary Guard approached, young, armed. He pointed at the group, said something in Farsi. Ed Johnson translated quietly. The guard wanted to see their bags. Random search, routine security. Everyone remained calm. The guard opened Anders's bag, pulled out clothing, a shaving kit. He moved to Cora Lejec's bag. Cameras, film, documents. He looked at the Studio 6 letterhead, asked a question. Cora explained they were Canadian filmmakers. The guard asked to see the business cards. She handed one over. He studied it, turned it over, looked at the logo. Studio 6 Productions, 1334 North Beechwood Drive, Hollywood, California. He handed it back, closed the bag, waved them toward the gate. They boarded the Swissair flight at 7:15 a.m., took their seats, separately, scattered throughout the cabin. The aircraft sat on the tarmac. Minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. The engines hadn't started. Mendez looked out the window. Revolutionary Guards stood near the terminal. Talking. One held a radio. Were they receiving orders? Had someone discovered the Americans were missing? Had someone checked the Canadian passport numbers against immigration records and found discrepancies? The engine started. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, taxied toward the runway, lifted off at 7:36 a.m., cleared Iranian airspace at 7:49 a.m. Only then did Mendez exhale. The 6 Americans sat in their seats, silent, stunned. They'd walked through Mehrabad Airport using fake passports and a story about a movie that didn't exist. And Iranian officials had believed every word. Kathleen Stafford started crying, quietly. Joseph reached over and held her hand. Mark and Cora Legic looked at each other. 79 days of fear released in that moment. Robert Anders closed his eyes. Lee Schatz stared out the window at Turkey passing below. They were out. The Swissair flight landed in Zurich at 11:30 a.m. The 6 Americans walked through Swiss immigration using their real identities. U.S. diplomats who'd escaped Iran. Swiss officials welcomed them. The U.S. Embassy sent cars. That afternoon, they flew to Frankfurt, then Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. On January 29, 1980, they landed on American soil, 80 days after escaping the embassy. Safe at the Canadian Embassy in Tehran, Ken Taylor and his staff prepared to leave. The operation couldn't stay secret. Once the Americans were safely out, Canada would have to close the embassy. Revolutionary Guards would retaliate. Taylor, his wife Pat, and the embassy staff departed Tehran on January 28th. Canadian diplomats had taken enormous personal risks, sheltering 6 Americans for nearly 3 months. They'd opened their homes, shared meals with fugitives, known that discovery meant prison or execution, and they'd done it anyway. In Washington, President Carter met with Tony Mendez and Ed Johnson in the Oval Office on March 12, 1980. Carter wanted to hear the story firsthand. Mendez described the operation, the fake movie studio, the Hollywood cover, the airport checkpoint, walking 6 Americans through Revolutionary Guard scrutiny using nothing but fake business cards and a ridiculous story. Carter listened, asked questions, thanked them. 2 days later, the CIA awarded both Mendez and Johnson the Intelligence Star, one of the agency's highest honors, for voluntary acts of courage performed under hazardous conditions. The ceremony was classified. Nobody outside CIA knew their names. The story broke publicly on January 29, 1980. Canadian reporters discovered that 6 American diplomats had escaped Iran with Canadian help. Headlines celebrated the Canadian caper. Ken Taylor became a national hero. Canada's role was emphasized. The CIA's involvement was mentioned briefly. Hardly anyone knew about Studio 6 Productions, or Tony Mendez, or the Hollywood con that made it work. That remained classified for 17 years. In 1997, the CIA declassified documents related to the operation. Intelligence historians wrote about the fake movie studio. Mendez's role became public. He published a memoir called The Master of Disguise, detailed the operation, explained the Hollywood collaboration. The story seemed too absurd to be real, except it was. Every detail, the fake movie, the variety advertisement, the business cards, the airport interrogation. It had all happened exactly as Mendez described. Hollywood noticed. In 2007, Wired magazine published an article called How the CIA Used a Fake Sci-Fi Flick to Rescue Americans from Tehran. The story went viral. Producer George Clooney optioned the rights. Ben Affleck directed and starred as Tony Mendez. The film Argo premiered in October 2012. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture, grossed $232 million worldwide, and made Tony Mendez one of the most famous CIA officers in history. The film took liberties. Hollywood always does. The real operation wasn't quite as dramatic as the movie version. There was no chase scene on the airport tarmac, no Revolutionary Guards pursuing the aircraft, no last-second phone call stopping the flight. The escape was quieter, more methodical, more boring, which is exactly why it worked. Mendez had designed the operation to be unremarkable, to blend in, to make Iranian officials so disinterested they stopped paying attention. But the core story was true. 6 American diplomats had hidden in Canadian homes for 79 days. A CIA officer had created a fake movie production company with help from Hollywood makeup artists. They'd placed ads in Variety, printed fake business cards, forged Canadian passports, walked through an airport controlled by Revolutionary Guards, and flown out of Iran without a single shot fired. The human cost of the Iran hostage crisis extended far beyond the 6 who escaped. 52 Americans remained captive at the embassy for 444 days, blindfolded, interrogated, paraded before cameras, used as bargaining chips in negotiations between Washington and Tehran. 8 American servicemen died on April 24, 1980, when Operation Eagle Claw failed. The military rescue attempt ended in disaster. Helicopters crashed in the Iranian desert. The mission was aborted. The hostages remained captive until January 20th, 1981, the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated president. Iran released them as a final insult to Jimmy Carter. But 6 had made it out early because of Canadian courage, Hollywood creativity, and a CIA officer who understood that sometimes the best cover story is the most ridiculous one. Tony Mendez retired from the CIA in 1990, 25 years of service. He'd conducted exfiltrations on 5 continents, created false identities for hundreds of CIA officers, designed disguises that passed KGB scrutiny, rescued agents from hostile environments. The Argo operation became his most famous. But it wasn't his only success. Mendez had pulled off dozens of operations that remain classified, saved lives nobody would ever know about. Intelligence work is quiet. Success means nobody notices you were there. After retirement, Mendez became a painter. Watercolors, landscapes, portraits. His art appeared in galleries across the United States. He taught workshops, lectured at spy museums, wrote memoirs about his CIA career. He married Jonah Heastand in 1991. She was also a CIA officer, chief of disguise. The two of them represented 52 combined years of intelligence service. They spoke publicly about intelligence tradecraft, disguise techniques, document forgery, the art of becoming invisible. In 2009, Mendez was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The degenerative neurological condition slowly robbed him of mobility. He continued painting, used a walker, gave interviews when he could, advocated for Parkinson's research, and watched as Hollywood turned his most famous operation into an Oscar-winning film. He attended the premiere of Argo in 2012, watched Ben Affleck play him on screen, said the filmmakers got most of it right. The spirit of the operation was accurate even if some details were exaggerated. Tony Mendez died on January 19, 2019, age 78, complications from Parkinson's disease. He passed away at home in Maryland, surrounded by family. Jonah Mendez released a statement, "Early this morning, Antonio J. Mendez finally succumbed to the Parkinson's disease that he had been diagnosed with 10-plus years ago. He fought the good fight and endured the slow, steady decline with his wife, Jonah Mendez, by his side. His courage never wavered." Ed Johnson, the second CIA officer who accompanied Mendez to Tehran, remained anonymous until 2023. The CIA revealed his identity in September during the finale of their podcast, The Langley Files. Johnson had been known only by his cover name, Julio, for 43 years. He was a linguist, exfiltration specialist, fluent in 5 languages. He'd been the backup, the translator, the contingency if things went wrong. His role was critical, but classified. Johnson lived quietly after retirement, never spoke publicly about the operation, never sought recognition. He died on September 8, 2024, at age 81. The CIA acknowledged his death, honored his service, noted that without Johnson's expertise, the operation might have failed. Ken Taylor died on October 15, 2015, age 81, colon cancer, 2 months after diagnosis. His wife, Pat, said Ken never regretted sheltering the Americans, never second-guessed the risk. He'd seen 6 terrified people at his door and opened it. That was who he was. Canada mourned him as a national hero. The United States awarded him the Congressional Gold Medal posthumously, recognizing extraordinary service to international diplomacy. His home in Tehran had been a sanctuary. His courage had saved lives. Patricia Taylor continued living in Ottawa after Ken's death. She remained active in scientific communities, published research on virology, taught at universities, spoke occasionally about the Canadian caper, remembered those 79 days when her home became a refuge for fugitives. She died on September 9th, 2024, at age 95. The Canadian government honored her with membership in the Order of Canada for contributions to science and international humanitarian service. The 6 Americans who escaped have lived quiet lives since 1980. Most left the Foreign Service. The trauma of 79 days in hiding took psychological tolls, nightmares, anxiety, the constant fear of discovery. Joseph and Kathleen Stafford eventually divorced. The stress of the crisis fractured their marriage. Mark and Cora Leac remained together. They've given occasional interviews, spoken at diplomatic conferences, corrected inaccuracies in the Argo film, noted that the real operation was less dramatic but more terrifying, living for nearly 3 months wondering if today was the day Iranian militants knocked on the Canadian ambassador's door. Robert Anders wrote about his experience for diplomatic journals, described the bureaucratic failures that led to the embassy takeover, the inadequate security, the State Department's failure to anticipate the danger. He testified before congressional committees, recommended changes to embassy security protocols. His experience in Tehran influenced how the U.S. protects diplomats in hostile environments. Lee Schatz, the youngest of the 6, returned to agricultural work, never went back to diplomatic service. The Iran experience ended his career with the State Department. He wanted normalcy, stability, a life where Revolutionary Guards weren't hunting him. The operation changed CIA thinking about impossible extractions. The Argo playbook became required reading for exfiltration specialists. Use credible covers, build verifiable legends, make the story boring enough that officials stop asking questions. Don't try to be invisible. Be unremarkable. Blend into normal life so thoroughly that no one notices you're not supposed to be there. Today, CIA officers study the Argo operation at the agency's training facility in Virginia. The case is taught alongside other famous exfiltrations. The lesson: sometimes the most audacious plan is the most believable. Revolutionary Guards expected Americans to sneak out, to hide, to run. They didn't expect them to walk through the front door carrying film equipment and business cards for a fake science fiction movie. Studio 6 Productions never made another film. The office on North Beechwood Drive closed in February 1980. The phone line was disconnected. The business cards were shredded. The Variety advertisement became a historical artifact. The CIA Museum at Langley displays original materials from the operation. Fake passports. Business cards. The movie poster for Argo. Visitors can see the props that convinced Iranian officials to let 6 Americans walk free. Mehrabad Airport still operates. It's called Mehrabad International Airport now. Commercial flights land daily. Security is different. Revolutionary Guards are gone. Professional immigration officers handle passport control. But the terminal is the same. Gate 4 still exists. The checkpoint where Joseph Stafford handed over a forged Canadian passport and said, "We're making a movie," is still there. Unremarkable. Just another airport immigration desk where thousands of travelers pass through every month. The fake Argo film never got made. Lord of Light remains unmade too. Jack Kirby's concept art survived. Museums display it. The drawings show elaborate temples, alien landscapes, futuristic technology. Kirby never knew his artwork helped rescue 6 Americans from Iran. He died in 1994. By then, the operation was still classified. The connection between his drawings and the CIA rescue wasn't revealed until 1997. His family learned that Kirby's work had saved lives. Indirectly. Strangely. Through a fake movie that became a real rescue. The Iran hostage crisis poisoned U.S.-Iranian relations for decades. The Islamic Revolution transformed Iran from a strategic ally into an adversary. Diplomatic relations ended. Embassies closed. The hostage crisis became a defining trauma for both nations. Americans remembered 444 days of humiliation. Iranians remembered decades of U.S. interference. The wounds never healed. Today, more than 40 years later, the two countries remain adversaries. But 6 Americans made it out early, because Ken Taylor opened his door, because Tony Mendez designed an impossible con, because Hollywood makeup artists built a fake movie studio in 4 days, because Ed Johnson translated when things got tense, because 6 terrified diplomats memorized their cover stories and walked through an airport pretending to be people they weren't. The operation cost approximately $50,000. Most of it went to the Variety advertisement and Hollywood production design. The rest paid for forged documents, travel expenses, cover materials. $50,000 to save 6 lives. The military rescue attempt that failed in April cost $12 million and killed 8 servicemen. The Argo operation succeeded with 0 casualties, 0 shots fired, 0 violence. Just a briefcase full of forged documents and a story about a science fiction movie that nobody in Iran bothered to verify. That's the lesson intelligence agencies learned. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a gun. It's a story people want to believe. Revolutionary Guards expected Americans to act like spies, sneaking through shadows, hiding, running. They didn't expect Americans to act like bored filmmakers complaining about bad weather and rescheduled location scouts. The cover worked because it was boring, because it made sense, because Iranian officials had better things to do than interrogate a Canadian film crew about a movie nobody cared about. Tony Mendez understood human psychology. People see what they expect to see. Present them with proper credentials and a boring story, they stop asking questions. Make yourself unremarkable. Make them lose interest. Walk through the checkpoint with confidence, and they'll wave you through because you're not worth their time. 6 American diplomats walked out of revolutionary Iran on January 28, 1980, carrying fake Canadian passports and business cards for a non-existent production company. They boarded a Swiss Air flight at 7:36 a.m., landed in Zurich 3 hours later. Free. The greatest exfiltration in CIA history had succeeded using nothing but paper, ink, and an absurd story about a science fiction movie. 80 Days of Fear ended in one morning at an airport. 0 shots fired, 0 casualties, 0 diplomatic incidents. Just 8 people walking calmly through immigration control, pretending to be people they weren't. And Revolutionary Guards never suspected a thing. If this story mattered to you, do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube's algorithm to show this story to more people. Stories like this don't get told unless people like you make them visible. Hit subscribe and click the notification bell. We're pulling stories like this from declassified archives, CIA records, and forgotten operations every single week. Real rescues, real courage, real people who risked everything when nobody was watching. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. US, Canada, UK, India, Iran. This community is worldwide and every voice matters. Tell me if you knew this story before today, or just type "never forget" so we know you're here. You're not just a viewer. You're part of making sure Ken Taylor, Tony Mendez, Ed Johnson, and 6 terrified Americans aren't forgotten. You're part of honoring courage that happened when nobody could talk about it. You're part of remembering that sometimes the most dangerous missions succeed not because of weapons, but because of creativity. Our community is strong now, from dozens of countries. Every single one of you matters. Share this video. Text it to someone who loves Cold War history. Post it on Facebook. Tweet it. Whatever. These stories deserve bigger audiences than they get. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure this story stays alive. Thank you for remembering that intelligence work isn't always guns and explosions. Sometimes it's fake business cards and a ridiculous story told well enough that people believe it. These weren't just diplomats. They were people, trapped in a revolution, hiding in strangers' homes, wondering if they'd see their families again. And they made it out because other people risked everything to help them. You're helping us honor them. See you in the next story.